there were 9 chairs around the lawyer's conference table, and my Aunt Patrice ordered the receptionist to leave the last one against the wall. "This is only for real heirs," she said without looking at me. I stayed in the hallway while everyone inside arranged themselves as though the empty seat had already decided the outcome. Then the lawyer opened the door, studied the room, and asked a question that made Patrice tighten both hands around her folder. If you have ever been treated like family when work needed doing, and like a stranger when inheritance was mentioned, stay with me until the end. Because the moment they thought I had been skipped was the same moment my uncle's last act of love finally became impossible to deny. My name is Nora Vale. I was 36, and I worked as a payroll coordinator for a small rehabilitation clinic. I was not loud, not polished, and not the kind of person my father's side of the family liked to display in photographs. To them, I was useful in the kitchen, reliable in a hospital room, and somehow invisible when the word heir came up. Let me back up. The man at the center of all this was my Uncle Raymond Vale, though I never called him Uncle Ray after I turned 13. To everyone else, he was my mother's older brother, a quiet widower who owned the old Vale house, 14 acres of pasture, 2 rental cottages, and a half share in a small hay barn on the county road. To me, he was the person who came to the hospital after my mother died and did not leave. My mother, Elise, was 31 when she passed from a sudden infection that turned serious, before anyone understood how far it had gone. I was 12, old enough to know people were lowering their voices around me, and young enough to think a suitcase meant temporary. Raymond took me home that night because my father had been gone since I was 4, and nobody else wanted to say aloud that there was nowhere else for me to go. The Vale house was not grand, but it carried itself like it remembered better years. It had green shutters, a long gravel drive, and a back porch where Raymond kept 2 rocking chairs even after his wife died. He taught me how to make coffee, balance a checkbook, patch a screen, and be quiet without disappearing. He used to say, "A home is not where people tolerate you, Nora. It is where someone puts your name on the key." That sentence mattered because my place in the family was always complicated. Raymond petitioned to adopt me when I was 13, after a social worker told him informal guardianship could become a problem if my father ever reappeared. The adoption was legal, final, and sealed by the county court, but he did not announce it at a party or ask anyone to clap. He told his siblings privately and asked them not to turn my childhood into an argument. His reasons were kinder than they were wise. Aunt Patrice, his younger sister, had never liked my mother and believed Raymond had given too much to Elise's troubles. Uncle Lionel cared about land more than people, and had been trying to buy the back pasture for years. Raymond thought if he made the adoption a loud family event, I would become the center of their resentment before I had even finished 8th grade, so we lived quietly. At school, I used Vale as my last name because it was on the adoption order, and at home, Raymond called me his girl. At Thanksgiving, Patrice still introduced me as Elise's daughter. Lionel called me Raymond's ward until I was nearly 30. Raymond corrected them when I could hear it, but not always in front of guests. He believed time would teach people decency. Time did not teach everyone. It taught some people how to wait for a will. Raymond's estate was not enormous, but in our county it was enough to change the temperature of a room. The old house had been appraised at $61,000 after the road expansion made our side of town desirable. The pasture could be leased, the cottages brought in $1,800 a month, and the barn share had sentimental value because Raymond and his father built it in 1977. More than money, it was standing. Whoever controlled the Vale house controlled the family story. Raymond made his estate plan in 2019 after a minor stroke scared him into organizing every drawer in the house. He named me as his adopted daughter in a pour-over will and created the Vale Family Trust to hold the real property. The trust said the house could not be sold for 24 months after his death, that I had the right to live there during that period, and that any sale after that required my written consent as successor trustee. I knew the broad shape of it because Raymond believed secrets could protect people only for so long. He showed me the first page of the trust, the adoption decree, and the sealed envelope with Ms. Calder's name on it. Ms. Calder was his attorney. a silver-haired woman with careful eyes who had known him since his wife died. Raymond told me, "If they act confused after I am gone, do not argue with confusion. Let the papers answer." Still, he asked me not to discuss the trust while he was alive. He wanted the people who loved him to love him without calculating what closeness might buy. He also wanted me to have a few peaceful years in the house without hearing Patrice and Lionel call my adoption a strategy. I agreed because he was the closest thing I had to a father, and because I had spent most of my life thinking peace was something you earned by staying small. The first small overreach came 3 months before Raymond died. He had been dealing with kidney failure for 2 years, and by spring he could not climb the stairs without stopping halfway. I moved into the downstairs sewing room so I could drive him to appointments, cook low-salt meals, and check his blood pressure before work. Patrice visited on a Saturday wearing perfume that made Raymond cough. She walked through the parlor with a tape measure and told her daughter, Celia, that the room would look brighter with the bookcases gone. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing Raymond's pill organizer. "Why are you measuring the parlor?" I asked. Patrice smiled as if I had asked a harmless question. "For later, dear. Families need to plan." "Raymond is sitting in the next room," I said. She lowered her voice. "That is exactly why adults should be realistic." I remember Raymond hearing it. His chair creaked, but he did not call out. Later that night, when I brought him tea, he looked toward the doorway and said, "People who count rooms too early usually forget who built the walls." The second pressure thread started with Lionel. He had wanted the south pasture since 2006 because it touched his own property and would give him road access for equipment. Raymond had refused him 5 times. Always gently, always saying the pasture belonged with the house. After Raymond got sick, Lionel began acting like refusal had only been a temporary misunderstanding. He came by one evening with a survey map and a pen. He told Raymond he could simplify things by signing a boundary adjustment. Raymond was asleep in the recliner, so Lionel handed the papers to me. "You can leave these where he will see them," he said. I read the first paragraph and saw it would transfer 4 acres out of the trust property for $1. "He is not signing this," I said. Lionel's eyes narrowed. "You are not qualified to decide what Raymond signs. Neither are you." He took the papers back, slowly. "You have gotten comfortable in a house that is not yours." That line stayed with me because it was not just cruel. It was a preview. Raymond died on a Wednesday at 5:38 in the morning, 2 days after asking me to open the bedroom curtains so he could see the maple tree. I was holding a damp cloth to his forehead when his breathing changed. There are moments grief makes sacred because nobody else is in them yet. For 11 minutes after he passed, the house was only quiet, and he was still mine to mourn. Then I called the hospice nurse, Ms. Calder, and Patrice, in that order. Patrice arrived with Celia before the funeral home did. She hugged me lightly, like someone touching a stranger's coat, then walked straight to Raymond's desk. "Where is the estate folder?" she asked. I said Ms. Calder had the originals. Patrice stopped with her hand on the drawer. "Of course you called the lawyer first. Raymond asked me to." She looked at me then, really looked, and said, "Raymond asked many things when he was weak." I did not answer because the nurse was in the hallway, and Raymond was still in the house. But something settled inside me that morning. Patrice was not confused. She had been rehearsing a story where my care was influence, my presence was opportunism, and my grief was evidence against me. The funeral was 6 days later. I sat in the second row because Patrice said the front pew was for siblings and the direct line. A cousin I barely knew moved over and whispered that I could sit with him. But I shook my head. Raymond had hated scenes, and I could feel his old lesson pressing against my ribs. Let the papers answer. At the luncheon, Celia asked whether I had started packing my room. She was 41, a dental office manager, and had inherited Patrice's gift for polite injury. "I know this is awkward," she said, "but Mom thinks it will be easier if the house is neutral before the reading." "Neutral?" I asked. "No one's personal things everywhere, It helps buyers imagine possibilities. I told her no buyer was imagining anything before the will was read. She gave me a small, patient smile. Nora, you are grieving. This is why family has to handle the practical side. Family. It was the word they used when they wanted my labor and withheld when they wanted my absence. 3 days later, Miss Calder's office sent formal notices for the will reading. Mine came by certified mail and email. The letter addressed me as Nora Vale, interested party and named fiduciary. I read that phrase 4 times at the kitchen table. Named fiduciary. It sounded cold, but after years of being described around not to, the word named felt almost tender. Patrice called that night. Her voice had the brittle cheerfulness she used when she had already decided the outcome. "We are meeting at Calder's office on Friday at 10, she said. "You do not need to come." I looked at the notice in my hand. I received a letter. Everyone received something. Lawyers send paper to avoid blame. It says I should attend. Patrice sighed. "Nora, this is a will reading for the Vale heirs. You were very good to Raymond. No one is taking that away from you, but sitting in that room will only make it painful when things are clarified." Clarified? How? Her voice sharpened. "Do not make me say something unkind." The unkind thing had already been said. It had been said in every holiday introduction. Every family photo cropped without me. Every time someone referred to the guest room in the house where I had slept for 23 years. Still, I did not tell her what the notice said. I only said, "I will be there." The next morning, Lionel left a voicemail. "If you have keys, account papers, or vehicle titles, bring them Friday. Do not create delay by playing daughter now." He hung up before the message reached 20 seconds. That afternoon, Celia came to the house with a cardboard inventory box and a printed checklist she said Patrice had made. She wanted Raymond's wedding album, his wife's jewelry case, the framed deed from the hallway, and the little ceramic bowl where he kept cottage rent receipts. "Mom says sentimental items should be secured before people start attaching meaning to them," she said. I stood between her and the hallway table. "Those things stay here until Miss Calder gives instructions." Celia's smile thinned. "You keep saying the lawyer's name like it makes you safer. It makes the process clearer." She looked past me toward the stairs. "You know, if Raymond meant for you to have something, he would have said it in front of us." I almost told her he had said it in court under seal with the judge's signature. Instead, I took a photo of the checklist with my phone and wrote down the time she came by. That was one of the first trustee habits I learned before I even knew I would need them. When people rewrite a story in real time, records become a kind of self-defense. That was escalation, but the breaking point came at Miss Calder's office. I arrived 15 minutes early with Raymond's sealed envelope, my certified adoption decree, the trust notice, and the old brass house key on a ring he had given me after high school. Patrice, Lionel, Celia, and 5 other relatives were already in the waiting area. The receptionist checked a printed list and said they would begin shortly. Patrice looked at my folder. "You brought props." I said nothing. When the conference room opened, Celia walked in first and started placing purses on chairs. There were 9 seats around the table. I stepped toward the last one, but Lionel pulled it closer to himself and set his coat over the back. The receptionist glanced between us, unsure. Patrice touched my sleeve with 2 fingers. "They skipped you at the will reading because this is not the place to pretend Raymond made you equal." Her voice was soft enough that only the people nearest us heard it. "Wait outside, Nora. Keep some dignity." For a second, the hallway blurred. Not because I was surprised exactly, but because some injuries are old enough that when they happen again, they bring every earlier version with them. I saw myself at 13, standing in Patrice's kitchen while she told someone on the phone Raymond had taken Elise's girl for now. I saw Raymond signing school forms in blue ink, writing father in the blank and daring anyone to object. I heard him say, "A home is where someone puts your name on the key." That memory steadied me. I did not pull the chair back. I did not tell Patrice that my adoption order had more authority than her tone. I did not cry in the hallway of an office full of strangers. I simply stepped aside, held my folder against my body, and let them walk into the room, believing silence meant defeat. My quiet decision had been made before I arrived. 2 days earlier, I had emailed Miss Calder a scanned copy of my notice and asked whether I needed to bring any supporting documents. She replied that Raymond's estate file already contained the adoption decree, trust agreement, deed transfer, and executor nomination, but I should bring my certified copy for the record. So when Patrice tried to exclude me, I did not need to argue. The legal process already knew my name. That was the action. I signed the attendance sheet, handed the receptionist my identification and certified decree, and waited beside the conference room door. No threats. No raised voice. No accusation. Just paper, dates, seals, and the patience Raymond had asked of me. For almost 5 minutes, everything seemed falsely calm. The door closed. Voices softened behind it. I could hear chairs shifting, a pen clicking, someone laughing once in that nervous way people do when they think an uncomfortable moment has passed. The receptionist offered me water. I nearly accepted because my mouth had gone dry. Then the conference room door opened again. Miss Calder stood there in a navy suit, holding the attendance sheet. She was small, straight-backed, and impossible to hurry. She looked past Patrice, past Lionel, past every person seated around Raymond's table of documents. "Before we begin," she said, "I need Nora Vale in the room." No one moved. Patrice gave a tight laugh. "She can hear whatever general information is appropriate afterward." Miss Calder did not blink. "No. Mr. Vale's will names Nora Vale directly. The reading cannot proceed without her." That was the moment the air changed. Celia's hand slid off the chair she had saved for her purse. Lionel stared at the attendance sheet like it had insulted him. One cousin looked at me with open confusion, as if he had just realized the person left in the hallway might have been invited by the dead man himself. I walked in and sat in the chair Miss Calder pulled from the wall. It was not at the head of the table. It did not need to be. The room had already heard the only sentence that mattered. For a minute, it looked resolved. Ms. Calder began with procedural language, confirming Raymond's death certificate, the original will dated April 8, 2019, and a trust amendment dated June 17, 2022. Patrice folded her hands and stared at the polished table. I thought maybe shock had finally made everyone still enough to listen. Then Lionel pushed an envelope forward. "Before anything is read, I want a capacity objection noted." Miss Calder looked at the envelope, but did not touch it. On what basis? Raymond was dependent on Nora. She isolated him. Any document naming her should be reviewed. Patrice nodded quickly, grateful for a new weapon. "We are not accusing anyone. We are protecting Raymond's true intentions." Ms. Calder opened the file in front of her. "Your objection is noted. It does not prevent today's reading. Mr. Vale's capacity was documented by his physician on June 10, 2022, and witnessed again at signing 1 week later." Lionel's jaw tightened. "Convenient. Documented," Ms. Calder said. "Not convenient. That second complication raised the stakes because it told me they were not merely surprised. They were prepared to turn Raymond's careful love into suspicion if it kept me from standing on the legal ground he had left me." I placed both hands flat in my lap and kept my eyes on the folder. Ms. Calder read the will in a voice that did not rise or soften for anyone's comfort. Raymond left personal items carefully. His wife's pearl earrings went to Celia because she had admired them as a child. His watch went to Lionel because it had belonged to their father. Patrice received the dining room sideboard and $25,000. 2 cousins received $10,000 each. The old tractor went to the neighbor who had helped Raymond cut hay after his stroke. Then Ms. Calder turned a page. "I nominate my daughter by adoption, Nora Elise Vale, as personal representative of my estate." The words did not sound dramatic. They sounded official. That made them stronger. Patrice whispered, "Daughter?" Miss Calder continued, "I further confirm that all real property previously transferred to the Vale Family Trust shall be administered under the trust terms. Nora Elise Vale is named successor trustee and primary beneficiary of the residence trust, subject to the maintenance provisions, cottage lease provisions, and delayed sale clause. Celia looked at me. Primary beneficiary? Ms. Calder kept reading. The Vale house, the 14 acres, both rental cottages and the barn share were held in trust. I had the right to live in the house. I had the responsibility to maintain it from trust funds and rental income. No sale, transfer, partition, or boundary adjustment could occur for 24 months. Any proposed sale after that required written consent from the successor trustee and 30 days' notice to all remainder beneficiaries. Lionel's face went red at the words boundary adjustment. Patrice stared at me like I had invented the language while sitting there. The fallout came in pieces. First there was silence, heavy and stunned. Then Celia asked to see the adoption decree. Miss Calder said it was part of the estate record and had been finalized by the county court on November 3, 2002. Lionel said he had never consented to any adoption. Ms. Calder said his consent had not been required. Patrice said Raymond never told her it was permanent. Ms. Calder said Raymond's private conversations did not alter a court order. Every answer closed the door they had assumed would stay open. Finally, Patrice turned to me. "You knew we did not understand." I said, "You understood enough to leave me in the hallway." Her mouth tightened, but she had no reply for that. After the reading, everyone stood too quickly. Chairs scraped. Papers rustled. Lionel asked Miss Calder for copies of everything, and she told him beneficiaries would receive the appropriate documents by mail. Celia stepped around me as if I were a spill on the floor. Patrice lingered near the door, looking suddenly tired. The one person who did not leave was my cousin Adam. He was Lionel's younger son, 29, a quiet mechanic who had fixed Raymond's truck for free more times than anyone knew. He had never been cruel to me, but he had also never challenged his father. That day, he waited until the hallway emptied and then asked if we could talk outside. We stood near the small garden behind the office where someone had planted lavender along the brick wall. Adam shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and looked at the ground. "Nora, did Raymond really adopt you?" he asked. "Yes, I was 13. The order is real." "Why did nobody say it?" Raymond said I had already lost enough without becoming a family debate. He told Patrice and Lionel he thought they would adjust with time. Adam winced. "My dad always said you were living there because Raymond felt guilty." "Raymond did feel guilty," I said. "He felt guilty that my mother died scared. He felt guilty that nobody protected her when she was young. But he did not adopt me out of guilt. He raised me because he wanted to." Adam looked up then. "He called you his daughter when we were alone. I thought it was just how he talked. It was how he lived." For a moment his face changed in a way I still remember. He looked ashamed, not in the performative way people look when they want quick forgiveness, but quietly, like something inside him had been rearranged. "I should have moved the coat," he said. That simple sentence reached me more than a long apology would have. "Yes," I said, "you should have." He nodded. "I am sorry." The turn began with Adam because he was the first person in that family willing to let the truth cost him something. That evening, Lionel called a family meeting at Patrice's house to discuss contesting the trust. I was not invited, but Adam called me afterward and told me what happened. His father had argued that Raymond was manipulated, that the adoption was old and suspicious, and that the delayed sale clause harmed the whole family. Patrice said I had always been quietly ambitious. Celia said I had made everyone look cruel on purpose. Then Adam stood up. He told them, "Nora did not make us leave her in the hallway. We did that ourselves." Lionel told him to sit down. Adam did not. "Raymond named her. The court named her. The will named her. Maybe the problem is that we spent 23 years refusing to say what was already true." Patrice began to cry, which in that family often meant everyone else was expected to stop talking. Adam did not soften the point. "You can grieve Raymond and still admit you were wrong about her." I was not in the room, but hearing it later felt like a window opening. Not because Adam saved me. The documents had done that. But because someone from their side finally said the human part out loud, the next 30 days were not peaceful. Lionel hired an attorney who sent one letter about capacity and undue influence. Ms. Calder answered with physician notes, witness statements, the adoption order, and 11 years of tax records showing Raymond had claimed me as his daughter long before the estate plan. The challenge faded before it became a lawsuit because suspicion sounds powerful until it has to stand beside dated records. Miss Calder also asked me to meet with her alone before I made any decision about the house. She slid a yellow notepad across her desk and said, "Write down what the trust requires before you write down what anyone deserves." Then she explained my duty in plain language. I could not use the trust to punish Lionel, reward Adam, or prove Patrice wrong. I had to maintain the property, keep clean accounts, send notices on time, and make choices Raymond's document allowed. "You are not the winner of a fight," she said. "You are the person he trusted with the aftermath." That meeting mattered because anger can wear a responsible face if nobody checks it. I left her office with a list of 8 immediate tasks, including insurance renewal, cottage deposits, a property tax deadline, and a written notice to every beneficiary. It was not glamorous. It was paperwork, which was exactly why Raymond had trusted it more than promises. Patrice avoided me until the inventory was filed with the probate court. The house was valued at $61,000, the cottages at $19,000, the pasture at $145,000, and Raymond's accounts at $84,000 after final expenses. Seeing those numbers made me understand why they had rushed to define me out of the room. It was easier to call me a helper than face the fact that Raymond had left responsibility to the person who had actually stayed. I did not move quickly, though I could have. I kept the house as it was for the first season. I paid the property taxes from the trust account, renewed the cottage leases, repaired the well pump for $3,800, and sent quarterly statements to every beneficiary because Ms. Calder said transparency would do more than anger ever could. In February, Patrice called and asked to come by. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I almost said no. Then I looked at Raymond's chair on the back porch and thought about how he had always believed people could become better if someone left them a path. I told her she could come Saturday at 2. She arrived with a cardboard box of old photographs. For once, she did not walk through the house like she was inspecting future property. She stood in the entry and waited until I invited her to the kitchen. The first thing she said was not enough, but it was true. "I was wrong to keep calling you Elise's daughter like it meant you were not Raymond's," she said. I poured coffee because my hands needed something to do. "Why did you?" She looked at the box. "Because if Raymond had a daughter, then I was not next in line to the house. And because your mother took up so much worry in this family that I resented her even after she was gone. That was not your fault, and I made you carry it. There are apologies that ask you to erase the past, and there are apologies that finally name it. Patrice's was the second kind. It did not make us close, but it made the room honest. I said, 'You left me in the hallway.'" Her eyes filled. "I know. You told them I was pretending. I know. I need you to understand that I am not managing this trust to punish you. I'm managing it because Raymond asked me to protect the house from panic." She nodded. "Autumn told me that if I contest it, I am not defending Raymond. I am defending my pride." That sounded like Adam. It also sounded like Raymond's influence still moving through the family in ways even paper could not capture. We spent that afternoon sorting photographs. Patrice found one from 2003, the year after the adoption, with Raymond standing behind me at the county fair, his hands on my shoulders. On the back, in his handwriting, he had written, "Nora and me, first fair as father and daughter." Patrice held it for a long time. "I saw this years ago," she said. "I think I pretended I had not. Why? Because accepting it meant I had to give up the version where you were temporary." That was the closest we came to forgiveness that day. Not a hug, not a dramatic family repair. Just one person admitting the lie had required effort. Sometimes accountability is not a speech. Sometimes it is a photograph turned over in a quiet kitchen. Over the next year, the family changed in uneven ways. Lionel stopped pushing for the pasture after Adam refused to help him find another attorney. Celia sent a text apologizing for asking when I would pack, and I answered with 2 sentences because that was all I could honestly give. Patrice began bringing flowers to Raymond's grave on his birthday, instead of only on holidays where people might see her. When the 24-month sale restriction ended, I had the legal right to keep the house in trust, sell it, or work out a longer plan with the remainder beneficiaries. I chose the slower path. The cottages stayed rented. Adam took over maintenance at a fair rate set in writing. Patrice received her cash gift and the sideboard. Lionel received the watch, though we sent Adam to pick it up. I stayed in the Vale house, not as a squatter, not as a grateful guest, and not as a secret. I stayed as Raymond's daughter and trustee, with my name on the documents and the key. That did not make the grief lighter, but it made the silence around it less lonely. On the 2nd anniversary of Raymond's death, Adam came over to repair the porch step. Patrice came with him and brought the old photograph in a simple frame. She asked if I wanted it in the hallway. I did. She hung it near the front door, where anyone entering the house would see Raymond behind me, both of us squinting into fairground sun, his handwriting copied on a small label beneath it. After she hung it, Patrice stepped back and said, "He really did choose you." I said, "He did not choose me instead of family. He made me family." She nodded, and for once there was no argument hiding behind her mouth. Being underestimated by family leaves a particular kind of bruise because it comes from people who know your history and still edit you out of it. But legacy has a longer memory than pride. A name on a document cannot create love by itself, but it can protect the love that others tried to deny. They skipped me at the will reading, until the lawyer said my name and Raymond's truth took the chair they left empty.